So now over to Anoop Tatti, who's going to be talking about GitHub Codespaces. So over to you.
Right, thank you very much, Nikki, for that. Let me start by sharing my screen. And just please set up the other window. Okay, here we go. Right, hello and welcome everyone to this session, which is on GitHub Codespaces and SPFx development. Right, before we start, today it's the festival of harvesting in India, and it's known by different names in different regions of India. We call it Sankranti. So happy Sankranti, everyone! And we have to be so there are lots of sweets made on this day. So my request is for you all to be sweet towards the questions in the end. Right. That in mind, let's start the session. So before starting this session, I would like to thank all the sponsors of this event. For without them, this event would not have been possible. And also thank you to all the organizers for all their hard work and making this session happen. So thank you very much, everyone. Right. Just a quick word about myself. My name is Anoop Tatti. I'm a Microsoft MVP in the Office development category, and I work as a developer at a company called Content and Cloud, based in the UK. I write blogs on SharePoint and a bit of Azure and Power Platform under the um, uh, uh, platform called as Medium, and that's a link to my blog. And I'm on Twitter as well under the username Anoop Tells, and my GitHub username is Anoop T. You can follow me on those platforms if needed. Right. So the agenda for today's session is we'll start with the introduction. We'll take a look at what GitHub Dev is and what GitHub Codespaces are, and then we'll do a setup on how to interact with Codespaces, and then we'll jump into a demo wherein we will create a Codespace and create an SPFx project and understand how it all works. And finally, we'll conclude with a summary and some resources. Right. So GitHub Dev. So, a few months back, GitHub introduced something called as GitHub.dev, which is nothing but a web editor that can be used for our repository, and it can be accessed from the browser. And with that, what we can do is maybe edit code, create pull requests, and commit changes. Now, the reason why I wanted to tell you about GitHub Dev was, that becomes the basis for understanding GitHub Codespaces. So let's quickly take a look as to what this GitHub Dev is. What I'll do is I'll go to my browser, and then I have a repository open in my GitHub account. So this is nothing but a simple SPFx project, and all it does is shows the status of the underground lines in London. I have committed. I had created this, as you can see, a long time back, and all the code is there. Now, let's say if I wanted to edit some of the code, not like a major edit, just maybe a file here and there. So for that, what I can do is I can use GitHub Dev. So all I have to do is just come to the repository and then just click dot. And what it does is, as you can see in the URL over here, it changes it to github.dev instead of github.com, and after that it opens the the repository in a web editor. So this is a familiar editor, which is nothing but VS Code. So what we can do now is, with the help of GitHub Dev, we can make changes to the code if needed, and then commit the code, and then back to a repository, and maybe even create a pull request. So that's what GitHub Dev is. It's a web-based editor which can be used to edit the code, or commit the code and create pull requests. However, what we cannot do using GitHub Dev is pardon me, we cannot run the code or test the code or debug the code. Because let's say if we want to make changes to the code, we would want to know, right, whether those changes are work correctly or not. So for that, we have to test or debug and then run the code to see if everything works. So we cannot do that with GitHub Dev. That's where GitHub Codespaces come in. So if I just go back to the repository and then go back to the slides, we'll see what GitHub Codespaces are. So GitHub Codespaces, it's nothing but a blazing fast development environment that's hosted in the cloud. So it's like a VM, which is present in the code, present in the cloud, which has the code that we have developed. So Codespaces, they run on a variety of VM-based compute options. These are provided by GitHub.com, and then we can configure a Codespace or with 2 cores to up to 32 core machines. Yeah. So in summary, GitHub Codespaces are nothing but the VMs present in the cloud, which are very fast, and they will host or they will contain the code that we have created in our GitHub repositories, and we can use those code spaces to say test, debug, and run our code. Now, let me go to the next slide and explain how it is all set up and how we can use code spaces. So if I go to the next slide, what I've done here is we've got 2 blocks. The block in the center is called as our laptop, is nothing but our dev laptop. And on the left side, we've got the Microsoft 365 tenant. So yeah, in a typical scenario, what we usually do is, let's say if we have code on GitHub or want to create a repository, we open the browser, go to github.com and create a repository over there, or maybe have an existing repository. And then what we do is we clone the repository onto a folder on our machine, because we want to make changes to the code or do something with it. That's why we clone all that code onto our machine in a folder, and then we use Visual Studio Code in order to open that code, make some changes to it, test it, and run it. So if this was an SPFx repository, then we would do the same, clone it to a folder, open in Visual Studio Code, and then what we do is we run the command gulp serve. What that does is it builds the code and then exposes the port 4321, which can then be used in order to open a SharePoint page, add our web part, maybe the workbench page, add our web part to it, and then see if the web part or maybe even the extension works properly or not. So that's a typical setup for our SPFx project if we want to develop it locally on our development machine. Now, with GitHub Codespaces into picture, what will happen is we will still have our repository on GitHub. I'm just bringing Codespace now. So we will see how to create a code space soon, but let's imagine that we have created a code space for this particular repository. What then happens is, instead of the code being on our local machines, the code is then cloned onto the GitHub repository, onto the GitHub code space, which is nothing but a VM in cloud. So the code will be present on GitHub, and then it will be cloned to a VM or a code space in the cloud. And then what we do is, from our machine, using Visual Studio, we use an extension called as Remote Explorer in order to connect to that code space and then get, connect to the code space and then browse our code. So all our code is on the code space in the VM. We use Visual Studio Code from our laptop or our development machine, and then we use an extension called as Remote Explorer, which is an extension present in VS Code, and using that extension, we connect to this folder or to the code present on the VM. And then after that, we will see it in action soon, but I just wanted to explain how it all works. And then what we do is we run a gulp serve, which what it does is it forwards the port 4321 from the VM onto our machine. So once the port is forwarded, we can then use that in our workbench, just like we do normally. So just to explain again, using Visual Studio Code, we connect to the Codespace using the Remote Explorer extension, and we run the gulp-serve command, which then forwards the port 4321 onto our machine, and then we use that port in order to access the web part on the workbench page in the SharePoint site. Right. So with that in mind, what we'll do is we'll take a look at the demo. So we'll start by creating an empty repository in GitHub, and then we will create a code space for that repository. And then what we'll go and do is we'll create an SPFx web part in that repository. And then finally, we will run gulp serve and then see that web part in action. So let me go to my browser, and then in my GitHub account, what I'll do is I'll go ahead and create a new repository, and I'll make this private for now, and then I'll call this as M365 correctly, and then we'll just add a README file. Right. So this is an empty repository. Now what we'll do is we'll create a code space for this repository. Now enabling code space for our account is a separate thing, which we'll come into later. But for now, let's assume that it has been enabled in our account, and then we'll go ahead and create a new code space. So what this does is it spins up a VM in Visual Studio Code. Sorry, it spins up a VM in the cloud, and then connects our repository to that VM. And as you can see, we are, this is the web-based editor for the code space. And over here, as you can see, we are in the repository and in the main branch. So this is, accessing the code space using the web-based editor. Now, instead of accessing this from the web-based editor, what I'll do is I'll open Visual Studio Code and access it from there. So let me just close this and then open a new window of Visual Studio Code. And then, like I said earlier, there's an extension called as Remote Explorer. When you click on that, it shows you all the different code spaces that will be available under our account. So let's just give it a minute for it to load, and then as soon as that is done, we should be able to see the code space is loading up, and there it is. So what I'll do is because my Visual Studio or in VS Code I have already connected to my GitHub account, it recognizes that there are some code spaces under my account, and that's the one which we created just now. So it is showing me that code space. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and connect to it, and then what that should do is it should open the folder which just has the README file basically. And then now what we can do is if I just open the terminal. So if you see, this is a VM present in the cloud. It has everything installed in it. So if I do check the version of Node, it has got version 14.17.6. So I didn't do anything. All I did was just create a code space, and everything is set up for me. Now, when you create a code space, say for an SPFx project, it won't have all the SPFx um, dependencies that are needed for SPFx. So we just have to add those. But there is a way in which, while creating the code space itself, we can say, hey, when you're creating the code space, also install these dependencies that are needed for SPFx. So now, because we do not have those dependencies, let me go ahead and add those. So if I just open my browser again and then just search for SPFx setup, it opens, and then go for the docs.microsoft.com article, and we need to install these following tools which are needed for SPFx. So all I do is I'll just copy these and then go back to Visual Studio Code and run that command. So basically, I'm doing an npm install of Gulp CLI, Human Generator, and the Microsoft Generator for SharePoint, because those are the ones we need in order to create SPFX solutions. So instead of running this every time I create a code space, what I can do is we can create something called as dot files, and then those dot files will contain this command basically, which is this whole thing installing Gulp, CLI, Human Generator, and the Microsoft SharePoint Generator. So whenever a code space is created, it will automatically install these for us. So there's no need to run this for the first time. So let's wait for these dependencies to install. And once they are installed, what we'll do is we'll go ahead and create a simple web part, which will just an out of the box web part, and it won't do much. So just give it maybe a minute or so, and then this should be done. So basically, as you can see, what we are doing is, instead of installing all these locally, we are installing the dependencies in a VM present in the cloud. So that VM is nothing but a code space provided by GitHub, which will be ready for SPFX development. So there you go. That is all installed. Now what we have to do is, our favorite command, which is yo at Microsoft/SharePoint, which is the first thing we need to run in order to create any SPFX solution. So I'll just go with the default settings for now. We go and create a web part, call it hello world, no JavaScript framework. And as you can see on the right side over here, all these files get added. That's what is done by this human generator. So all these files will get created pretty quickly, and then we can then start playing with this web part. So whilst that happens, what I'll do is I'll just open my dev tenant, and then go to the SharePoint site that I'd created for this demo. So let's go back to the Visual Studio Code and see if the web part has been created. So yeah, it should take a minute or two, and then we should have the web part ready. There you go. So that's the web part. So now if I go into source, open the web part, and then the web part file itself, just try this. So as you can see, it has got hello world, the default text. So what I'll do is I'll just go ahead and run gulp serve, and then supply the flag no browser what this will do is this will build the code, and then as you can see over here under the ports tab, it has forwarded the port 4321 onto our machine. So if I go into the terminal again, and then we have that. So now the port is forwarded. So what I'll do is I'll just go to that local host 4321, and then I'll try and open the manifest file. Now, because we haven't run the gulp trust dev cert, we get this error. However, if we run that, then we do not get this error. So for now, I'll just say, I know it is all good, so I'll just continue to it. And then what I'll do is in this page, I'll just load the debug URL. So by doing that, when I edit this page and then press add a web part, I should be able to see the hello world web part, and there it is. And that's the one which is present in our code space, running in our code space, and the port 4321 is forwarded onto our machine, and we have now opened that in an SPFx page. So in order to see that this is the correct web part and not the one which I had already installed, what I'll do is I'll go to the code and say welcome to M365 Chicago, and save that. Let's give that a minute. And then it should go ahead. Is that done? Yeah, that's done. So now if I go ahead and refresh this page, as you can see over here, the message has now changed to M365 Chicago. So just to go back to the slides and recap what we have done. So if I just go to the previous slide. So what we did initially was we went ahead and created an empty repository in GitHub. And then the next step was we went and created a code space for that repository. So we saw that it just had the README file. So what we did was it did not have any SPFx related dependencies. So we went ahead and ran the command in order to install the SPFx dependencies. So this VM now had all the SPFx related dependencies. So we then connected to that VM or to that code space using Visual Studio Code, with the help of the Remote Explorer extension, and then we opened the terminal in Visual Studio Code, and then ran the command yo at Microsoft SharePoint, which went ahead and created the web part in the in this folder within the VM, and then we ran the command gulpser, which then forwarded the port 4321 from the VM onto our machine, and we were then able to access that in our SharePoint page. So that's how GitHub Codespaces work with SPFx. Now, and then that's what we saw in the demo. So we were able to access a web part that was present in the code space onto our site in SharePoint. Now, what are the advantages of Codespace? Because you might be wondering, Anoop, you showed us all these things, but we could have done this locally. Why should we do it in Codespace? So firstly, the thing is, as you saw, there was no setup needed. So I did not install Node.js or NPM or anything of that sort. It was all there because it's a standardized dev environment. All I did initially was just install the SPFx dependencies. But with the help of dot files, what we can do is we can create something called as a dev container.json file, and then just specify, for it to install the SPFx dependencies, and that will take care of installing the SPFx dependencies without us having to run the command. So no setup is needed. Even so, Node.js and everything It's all installed, and then we have the dev environment spun up for us in seconds. Secondly, the code is not present locally, so it's all present in this VM, which means, again, there's no need for us to do any installation, which means, pardon me, which means node modules are not present on our machine. So it's all in this VM, so we can use it. We can use this VM for the entire duration of the project, or we can stop it whenever needed and then delete that machine. So nothing is present locally. Everything is in the code space, and it's all connected to GitHub. And then I'll quickly show you. I missed one step, which was committing the code back to the GitHub repository. We'll see that soon, but nothing will be present locally. And then in order to, let's say if we have an existing repository which has some code in it, and we want to make some changes and then test whether it all works. So we can quickly spin up a code space, have our code over there, do some changes, test it, debug it, and see if everything is okay, and then just commit the code back to the GitHub repository and create a pull request. So there's no need for us to download the code onto a local machine, set it up, and install all the dependencies, etc. It's so the GitHub Codespaces will have everything set up for you, so you can easily create a PR. And the final thing is these VMs are very fast. Say, let's say if I have a slow machine or a slow laptop, then if I have to set up everything locally and install everything on it, then in order to test or debug, it might take a lot of time. But on this slow laptop, now all I need is Visual Studio Code, and then with the help of Remote Explorer, I can Remote Explorer extension, I can connect to a GitHub Codespace, which is very fast. So all the code runs on this Codespace. So none of the resources from my machine, from my slow machine, are used. It's all running in the Codespace, and the port is forwarded. So the development experience feels very fast. So you feel that you are developing locally, but you are actually not. But the experience is as if you are developing locally. Right. So now having had a look at those advantages, let me just go back to the code and finish the final part, which is submitting the code back to GitHub. So as you can see, I've made this change, and then I'll just stop the gulp command. And what I'll do here is, because this is all integrated with GitHub, I can see that these are all the changes that were made, or because this is the first time I have created an SPFx webpart in this repository. These are all new files, so I'll just add a message saying initial commit, and then say yes to that, and then just push that to the main branch. Now, if I go back to my browser and then open that same repository and refresh this, see all the code is over here. So let's say if another team member wants to see the changes I've made, so they can go ahead and go to this repository and then create a code space for this on their own. So that code space will be under their account. They can then get the code on their code space and then make the changes and then do the same process again. So that's how it works. So we saw that we created an empty repository in GitHub, added the SPFx web part onto it, opened it in the code space, and then committed the change from code space back to our GitHub repository. So the code is now in GitHub. And so let's say if we delete the code space, then we can still access the code because we have committed the code from the code space back to GitHub, and then like I said, share this repository with someone else, and they can go ahead and do the same thing again. Click on code, and then they'll see the option to create a code space, and then they can create a code space on their own and then make the changes from their side. Right. So now let's have a look at some other things, like how to get these code spaces and what is all needed. So basically, there are some links provided by GitHub, and I'll be sharing these links soon. So firstly, this article explains what a code space is and how we can use code space and how to set it up uh, for our team. Now, if I just go back to another link which explains about, sorry, not this one. I think it was this one. Spelling. Yeah. So as you can see over here, the code spaces are currently, available in the team and enterprise plans of GitHub. So currently, individual accounts are not being built for code space usage. So I think a few months back, we had GitHub Codespaces in beta, and then I had signed up for the beta, and then after that, uh, those users have been given access to Codespace. That might be revoked soon, but as of now, if we want to get GitHub Codespaces, then we need to have GitHub team or enterprise plans. And once that is done, we will see an option to create a code space for the repository. And after that, depending upon the usage of the code space, the cost, as you can see, is very minimal. So for SPFx, you can just maybe use a 2-core or a 4-core code space, and then the the cost involved is 36 cents per hour. So it's yeah. Um, that's what the cost structure is at the moment. So we need to be part of a team or the enterprise plan, and then we can create these code spaces very easily. Right. If I just go back to these slides again. So yeah, like I said, these are all the resources that I showed earlier. What I have also done is, if I just go back to the browser again, I have written an article on how to use code spaces for SPFx development. So this clearly explains what code spaces are, how we can set it up. And in this blog article, I have also mentioned about these dot files, which is nothing but a dev container JSON and a Docker file. In that, like I said, we can have the code which will run the initial npm commands in order to install the SPFx dependencies. So yeah, this article walks through how to set it up and how we can use GitHub Codespaces for SPFx development. Okay, now what I'll do is I we'll try and see using GitHub Codespaces in order to create like Azure functions, and then how we can use those in SPFx. So I'll open a new instance of Visual Studio Code and then go to Remote Explorer again. And what I've done is I created a repository which had Azure function in it. So again, I did the same thing. I went to GitHub, created an empty repository, and then created a code space for that, and then installed all the dependencies that were needed in order to develop Azure functions. Microsoft have a nice article about that on how what all needs to be installed. So I did that. I installed all the dependencies and then created an Azure function. So if I just connect to that code space, which has the code for Azure function, so all I did was just think it was function init or something. That's the command I ran, which went ahead and created a simple hello world function for me. So let's just give it a minute to load. And then, yeah, as you can see, it's just a simple function. All it does is just gets the query and then returns whatever is passed in the query string. So what I'll do is I'll run this command called as function start. So again, this is a code space. Okay, that's not right. So I have to go into the folder within and then start. So again, this is a code space or a VM present in the cloud, which has an Azure function in it. And I have now started the the function from the code space. So if I just maybe copy this URL, and then as you can see, just before I do that, this code space has forwarded the port 7071 onto the local machine. So if I just copy this URL, go to browser and then paste that and then say name equals M365 Chicago. And then it says, hello, M365 Chicago, the function is triggered successfully. So basically what has happened now is, because the port 7071 was forwarded, when I hit that endpoint, the request went to the VM, executed the Azure function, and then gave us a response. So now that we know the Azure function is running, what I'll do is I'll just open a new instance of Visual Studio Code, and I have created another code space with the hello world web part again, but this time if I maybe just come on, connect to that. So this is just a test web part, which has got a nice name, SPFx test 123. So this is nothing but an SPFx web part, again running in the code space. What I've done here is I've just added a small piece of code which just calls the Azure function. So let's give that a minute to load. And whilst that happens, I'll just go to this page and then edit that and delete this web part because that was the web part from the previous demo. So let me just reset this page. Okay, that's all good. Now, so this is the web part I was talking about. So as you can see, we've got the same text over here, but in the render method, what I've done is, I'm calling the Azure function, which is running on another code space, and then I'm passing the name as M365 Chicago. And then what we are doing is we are capturing that response in a variable called as message, and then the idea is to show the message over here within the web part. So what I'll do is I'll just go ahead and run this command gulp serve no browser. So this will then build the SPFx project within this new code space, and it should expose the port 4321 from that code space, and we should be able to access that web part. So if we maybe give it a minute or so, yeah, there you go. The command has now started, and it should now forward the port. Okay, let's give it a minute. I'm waiting for this ports tab to light up to say that it has forwarded the port 4321. Once that is done, we know that we will be able to access the web part, which is present in this code space in our SharePoint site. Okay. Right, let's say, okay, don't know why it is not doing that. So what I'll do is I'll go to my GitHub account and then maybe stop that other code space. Maybe that makes a difference. So it is this one. I'll just go ahead and stop the code space. Not sure if I'm doing the right thing, but this is just an experiment. So here we go. And run gulp serve browser. Okay. Oh, where is? Let's try and. Okay, there you go. The port is now forwarded. So what I'll do is I'll go to my page again, and here I'll just load the manifest into the current URL, and I'll edit this, and then add the delete the section, and then add the hello world web part. Before that, I'll just also open the network tab. Yeah, then I've set it to 7071 so that we should see when the request goes to the Azure function. So if I add the Azure, the web part, right. Yeah. So what has happened is, as you can see, firstly, there's the message that is coming from the Azure function. So it says, hello, M365 Chicago, the function was executed successfully. And right at the bottom over here in the network panel, we can see that the request was sent to that endpoint. And then the response was just a simple text, which we are loading in our web part. So just to recap, what happened here is we initially created a code space in which we created an Azure function and then started that Azure function. So that was forwarded on the port 7071. And then we created another code space in which we created an SPFx web part. And then all we did in that web part was using the HTTP client, we called the Azure function, which is running on the port 7071. And then the web part called that Azure function, got a response from it, and then showed that response onto the show that response in this variable called message, and then that was that could be seen in the web part over here. So that's how we can use Codespaces for development. So all I did, whatever I showed to you today, nothing was done locally. Everything was running in these Codespaces which are present in the cloud. So there was no Azure function related dependencies or SPFx related dependencies installed on my machine. Everything was done on these VMs in cloud, and we were able to just access those with the help of Visual Studio Code. So all I needed on my machine was Visual Studio Code and then the Remote Explorer extension. And then I was able to access these code spaces and do the development. And once I'm done with the development, what I can do is I can just commit the code and push it back to GitHub. And then maybe, let's say if I go to, if I open the code in some other machine, then all I need on that machine is just VS Code and then use Codespaces to connect to the code again. So that's how Codespaces help us in development. Right. With that, I want to conclude the presentation. So M365 Chicago is supporting the Chicago Public Schools through the Children First Fund. So make sure you scan this link and do your donation. And finally, let us know how we can improve the conference by scanning this link. Right. Thank you very much once again for attending this session. I'm happy to take any questions from the chat. I know I think we've got like 3 or 4 minutes remaining in the call. All right. Thank you very much once again.